Pesticides weren't always thought to be harmful. To the contrary. In 1947, Time magazine carried an advertisement claiming DDT was good for people, homes, and farms. It took 20 years before scientists realized how dangerous it was.
It begins with the war-born development of DDT. This diabolical weapon of modern science saved millions of humans, but killed billions of insects. Man, with this newly discovered force, has at long last gained the upper hand in our age-old struggle. Just like these mosquito larvae, it came from laboratories where top scientists from famous universities and from industrial and government organizations collaborated to develop something new and different. They succeeded. They perfected Pestroid, the most effective weapon man has ever wielded against insects. To begin with, this new pest killer is a DDT preparation. We realize what that means. Once a bug comes in contact with DDT, he's lost. All he has to do is just walk on any Pestroid-treated surface. DDT is absorbed through the feet and spreads throughout the insect's entire nervous system. The effect is disastrous. DDT seems to literally drive bugs crazy. But not for long. DDT next paralyzes, then kills.
People thought it was a good thing because they got action in solving a problem as they conceived it. They were, for example, complaining about mosquitoes. And if the spray truck came down the street, they were told to just stay indoors for a few minutes and everything would be all right. So you had the government endorsing a product and you had the chemical industry pushing it very aggressively.
There was a development program going on within the corporate system saying, well, if a little bit is good, a lot more is much better, isn't it?
Public health departments staged demonstrations to convince the public of DDT's effectiveness and safety. Enthusiasm for the chemical knew no bounds, and few were questioning the wisdom of such use. Public places and private backyards were being treated whether people liked it or not. In 1957, planes sprayed a Massachusetts bird sanctuary owned by Olga Huckins, a friend of Carson's. In fury and desperation, Huckins told her what had happened. The birds showed all the symptoms typical of DDT poisoning. Huckins knew that the planes would be back in spite of her protests. She asked Carson for help. Carson later remembered how the thought of a spring silent of birdsong had moved her to action.
It was your personal letter to me that started it all. In it, you told what had happened and begged me to find someone in Washington who could help. It was in the course of finding that someone that I realized I must write the book.
We have to remember that children born today are exposed to these chemicals from birth, perhaps even before birth. Now, what is going to happen to them in adult life as a result of that exposure? We simply don't know.
This is one of the nation's bestsellers, first printed on September 27, 1962.
In her groundbreaking book, Silent Spring, Rachel Carson jolted a prosperous post-war America, a country confident that science and technology were leading the way to a future in which disease and hunger could be overcome. In no small part thanks to a new generation of powerful pesticides. But in Silent Spring, Carson warned that progress had a price.
These sprays, dust, and aerosols are now applied almost universally to farms, gardens, forests, and homes. Non-selective chemicals that have the power to kill every insect, the good and the bad, to still the song of birds and the leaping of fish in the streams. All this, though the intended target may be only a few weeds or insects.
Through sheer determination, Carson participated in an hour-long CBS News documentary on pesticides.
CBS reports The Silent Spring of Rachel Carson,
which aired not long after Silent Spring became a national bestseller.
Can anyone believe it is possible to lay down such a barrage of poisons on the surface of the earth without making it unfit for all life?
While Carson didn't contend that chemical insecticides must never be used, she faced harsh opposition.
A spokesman for the chemical industry, Dr. Robert White Stevens.
The major claims in Miss Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, are gross distortions of the actual facts, completely unsupported by scientific experimental evidence and general practical experience in the field. If man were to faithfully follow the teachings of Miss Carson, we would return to the Dark Ages, and the insects and diseases and vermin would once again inherit the earth.
And when CBS turned to government experts, the questions were many, but the answers few.
Dr. Paige Nicholson, water pollution expert, Public Health Service.
Do you know how long the pesticides persist in the water once they get into it?
Not entirely.
Do you know the extent to which our groundwater may be contaminated right now by pesticides?
We don't know that either, nor do we know if concentration may be occurring in groundwater.
Now, to these people, apparently the balance of nature was something that was repealed as soon as man came on the scene. Well, you might just as well assume that you could repeal the law of gravity. The balance of nature is built of a series of interrelationships between living things and between living things and their environment. You can't just step in with some brute force and change one thing without changing a good many others. Now, this doesn't mean, of course, that we must never interfere, that we must not attempt to tilt that balance of nature in our favor. But unless we do bring these chemicals under better control, we are certainly headed for disaster.
Rachel Carson, author of the landmark book Silent Spring, started a revolution. During the 1950s, when crop dusting planes and insect sprays blanketed plants with DDT, Carson warned of the dangers of chemical pesticides. She warned of science's power to alter nature and called for government action to protect its citizens. Because of her courage, the disaster did not come to pass, and with Carson's words and spirit, the modern environmental movement was born.
DDT was banned almost 50 years ago, but we still see a plethora of insecticides and herbicides on the market today. Wouldn't it be better to approach fighting pests in a different way? Integrated Pest Management is a method of using beneficial insects to eradicate the pests. Gardeners are finding this to be a better solution.
So what got me interested in integrated pest management was watching what was happening in my home garden. So I would see things in my leaves, or little critters on my cabbage leaves, or robins digging furiously in the raised beds. And I thought, well, they're after something, and something's after my plants. I definitely will not use any chemicals in my garden. For sure, it's not a healthy way to go. And you wipe out the good bugs along with the bad ones that you're after. So that's kind of what got me started. And so I would say you need to spend a lot of time paying attention to what's happening on the plants and in the garden. Spend some time looking at your plants. Kids are really great at this. If you have children or grandchildren, get them over to your plants. They'll find the bugs right away. If you're not sure, you can't identify what's eating them, then you could certainly put out some traps. I used some yellow sticky traps, and within a day I knew that I had flea beetles causing those holes in my beloved kale and other kale plants. Then at least you know what you're dealing with. And then your research can take you into what is the best way for me to manage this problem that I have now.
Our biggest pests in our high tunnel seem to be aphids, and if we have beans in there, then we have Mexican brown beetles. And this year we had a different insect attacking our kale, and it was a carnival beetle. Remember? You
that's
identified.
right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
black
very
and orange
pretty.
one?
Yeah.
Yes, striped black
very
and orange.
pretty.
We never had those before.
Integrated pest management is kind of a hands-off method of dealing with pests in the garden. We try to let the beneficial insects take over rather than using non-poisonous insecticidal sprays. There are two kinds of beneficial insects: predators and parasitoids. Predators eat their prey. Parasitoids lay eggs on or within their prey. Predatory insects feed on other insects, such as the many pests that invade and infest gardens and landscapes. Lady beetles, or ladybugs, are the most recognizable beneficial insects and have a voracious appetite for aphids as a nymph and as an adult. They also feed on caterpillars, moth eggs, scales, mites, and may also be cannibalistic if prey is scarce. The taconid fly is a parasitoid insect that glues its eggs on a host caterpillar and lays its eggs on plants eaten by their host. The eggs hatch and the larvae feed on the host until it dies. If the host eats the eggs on the plants, they hatch and the larvae eats the host from the inside. People use bugs and insects interchangeably, but there is a difference. In the taxonomy of classifying members of the animal kingdom, insects are from the phylum of arthropods. The class is divided into arachnids, which are spiders and scorpions, and insects. There are 29 insect orders. Here are 5 of the 29: beetles, ants, bees and wasps, butterflies and moths, flies, true bugs. For now, we'll cover 2 insect orders, beetles and bugs. The most prominent difference between a beetle and a bug is their mouth parts. Bugs have a needle-like piercing stylet. It's a straw-like mouthpiece used to pierce their prey and inject chemicals that liquefy the prey's internal organs. The stylet then allows the bug to suck the liquids. Beetles have chewing and biting mouthparts and well-developed jaws to capture prey. Bugs undergo incomplete metamorphosis. Beetles undergo complete metamorphosis. Bugs lay eggs that hatch into miniature-looking adults. Beetles lay eggs, have a larval stage, then go through the pupa stage before emerging into an adult that looks totally different from their larva. One of the most ubiquitous insect pests in the garden is the aphid. Aphids are soft-body insects that spend their life sucking the sap from plants and have an incredible capacity for reproduction. Female aphids are parthenogenetic. That means they can reproduce asexually. They're capable of giving birth to young without a male partner. This ability to reproduce in large numbers overwhelms host plants that wilt and die.
Another thing we found out in the tunnel is if you have a lot of ants, you probably have aphids someplace and they are going to multiply and take over.
Ants love aphids, not to eat as prey, but to eat their sugary excretions called honeydew secreted from the anus. The 2 tailpipes at the back, called cornicles, release a sticky substance as a defense mechanism against predators. Aphids and ants have a legendary symbiotic relationship. Ants farm aphids. They take care of them, protect them from predators, and control them like livestock. Ants transport aphids to healthy plants so the aphids can suck the nutrients from the plants and produce honeydew for the ants to eat. Ants also massage the aphid's posterior to encourage the aphid to secrete the honeydew. The ants release a chemical from their feet onto the aphids, which serves as a tranquilizer. While the aphids are in a subdued state, the ant assumes total control and transports or carries their honeydew slaves from location to location. The ants will even bite off aphids' wings to deter an aphid's escape. What seems like an even exchange is actually an act of slavery by the ants, for they are truly addicted to the aphid's honeydew. Flea beetles are wicked little insects that can dispatch a plant very quickly. Notice the lace-like pattern they leave as their calling card. They overwinter in the soil and are some of the first to emerge when the weather warms up. Flea beetles love to feast on many cold weather plants, such as kale, mustard greens, bok choy, lettuces, and spinach. They're called flea beetles because they jump like fleas when disturbed. The best way to control flea beetles is to use yellow sticky sheets to catch the adults so they don't procreate.
So one of the great things I enjoy about my garden is really paying attention to what's happening. I love the birds. One day I saw a lot of American robins in one of my raised beds. I wondered what they were after. I quickly found out they had big grubs in their beaks. They even had mama bird showing baby bird what to catch. So I dug around a little bit in the raised beds, and sure enough, there were grubs. These were grubs related to June beetles. And in fact, I had seen the June beetles in my garden earlier. Research showed one of the most important things to do is to get some beneficial nematodes into your garden bed to get rid of the grubs. So beneficial nematodes are round worms, and they're naturally found in the soil. And what they do is they get inside those grubs, which is the larval form of beetles, and they essentially attack it with their bacteria from the inside out. So beneficial nematodes are microscopic, so you won't see them if you're digging around in your soil. And they are part of the normal soil critters that just live there. So if you're using them to get rid of a pest, like I used for the grubs, you will be introducing the beneficial nematodes, and they'll, multiply and be there perhaps to help with other pests.
So we're looking underneath the leaves of pumpkins early in this season, and we have found not only squash bugs, but these are squash bug eggs. Some found on the leaf, some found on the stem. They, when they hatch, they eat the juice that's in that stem, and eventually they just kill the plant.
Yeah.
I'm going to take this knife, I'm going to cut it, and put it in some soapy water.
Squash bugs are some of the most ferocious and prolific pests in the summer. First, they attack young squash plants and then graduate to older plants. The bugs mate, and the females lay clusters of around 20 eggs on the underside of leaves or on the stems of their host plants. The eggs hatch within 10 days. The nymphs look like small black spiders and mature in 4 to 6 weeks. During this time, they go through 5 developmental or instar stages. Both adults and nymphs hide under leaves and at the base of plants where they feed. Squash bug adults can live through the winter in sheltered places such as plant debris, at the foundation of buildings, under rocks, and any place that offers shelter. When adults emerge in the spring, they fly to cucurbit plants to feed and mate. Cucurbits are the gourd family, which includes squash, pumpkin, cucumber, and melon. The best prevention is to find the eggs and destroy them. Nymphs scatter very fast, so spray them with soapy water. The direct contact will kill them. Many gardeners handpick the adults and drop them into buckets of soapy water. Here's another unwelcome summer visitor to the garden, the Mexican bean or Mexican brown beetle. Your eyes aren't lying. They look similar to the ladybug because they are in the same family, but they are of a different species. This species is very destructive and very prolific. The females lay yellow eggs in clusters on the underside of bean leaves. The eggs hatch and yellow larvae emerge with branched spines covering their soft bodies. Mexican bean beetles also have 4 developmental instar stages that transform into a bright yellow pupae. The adults can also overwinter and hibernate like the squash bug and emerge when the weather warms up so they can mate and lay eggs on any legume plant.
So, one nice person, we used to have a real big problem with aphids. So a nice person bought some assassin bugs and put them in the high tunnel. Now, I had read about them, and the reason I was against them is because they said they were aggressive and would bite people. And I didn't want the people working in the tunnel to get bit, because they're very close. They'll be right in there. Their hands will be right where the assassin bugs were. But anyhow, someone put assassin bugs in there, and that was okay. Except one of the plants that she had inoculated or whatever with assassin bugs became just a hotel for aphids. The plant was white with aphids. So finally, I just pulled it and threw it away. And it had the expensive assassin bugs in there. So I have no idea if the assassin bugs could have worked if they were in there earlier. That's what I'm thinking. That they just were overwhelmed. And
did she ever forgive you?
No.